Our first illustrious speaker today is Olivia Chapman. She was diagnosed with Stargardt's disease at age 14, was the first Australian patient in a clinical trial, that would terrify me, so she's brave as, aimed at slowing down the disease's effects. Today, she's a first-year student at UTS, University of Technology Sydney, where she's doing a double degree in sports business management and international studies, Italian. So I don't know whether you're speaking to us in English or Italian, but thank you.
Well, I had a little introduction for myself, but I think that was perfect. Don't have anything else to say. So my journey with the SSI Institute began when I was 14, after a regular optometrist check-up resulted in the discovery of a rare genetic form of macular degeneration. Let me get to my slide. Shortly after my diagnosis with Stargardt's disease in 2020, I began working closely with members of the SSI Institute and became the first participant in a new clinical trial for adolescents with my condition. Entering the senior years of high school with a relatively new vision impairment was one of the hardest things I may ever have to do. Holding the grief of a normal life whilst trying to begin implementing permanent adjustments to my life at an age when I was already trying to figure out who I was and what my future looked like was overwhelming. During my 6-month diagnostic process, the shock and uncertainty of my vision loss clouded my ability to truly articulate how my world was changing, even to myself. As a young teen, I struggled to understand my grief amidst my tentative optimism about the details of my condition. Coming to terms with the long-term impacts of my vision loss was a slow, non-linear process that I continue to navigate today. And one of the most life-changing tools for me was art. Throughout my high school life, I developed a passion for art that continued after my vision loss, allowing me to work with my school to create ways for me to continue expressing myself artistically. As part of the IB Visual Arts program in Year 11 and 12, we were tasked with the creation of an 11-piece exhibition exploring a chosen concept. One of the most difficult aspects of losing my vision was the inability of the people around me to truly understand my everyday experience. I found myself Googling visual depictions of my vision, disappointed by how limited the results were and their inability to accurately portray not only the way the world looks for me physically, but the profundity of its emotional impact on an adolescent such as myself. That lack of accurate representation was where the concept for my exhibition began, and it's the driving reason that I stand in front of you all today. To share my story, but also to shed light on the realities of living with a vision impairment and to operationalize true support of students with disabilities. Over time, my 2-year exhibition became a visual representation of the emotional journey, centering on the relationship between memory, human connection, and identity. Through my works, I explored how the world around me became more distorted and uncertain, but also how that change shaped the way I see myself. So today, I want to take you through what that journey looks like for me, from those first months of uncertainty and into my senior years of high school, to show not only the challenges, but also the systems of support that made the biggest difference. My hope is that by the end of this talk, you'll leave with a deeper understanding of the emotional impact of vision loss, and with some practical ideas for how to better support and empower the next generation of students who are going through something similar. I went to MLC school in Burwood, where I completed the IB diploma in 2024. Moving into the senior years was a challenge that required more planning and problem solving than I could truly fathom. Stargardt's disease causes a deterioration in my macula, similar to that shown in the image above. This hole in my macula creates a visual distortion similar to that seen in the image beneath it, where a photo of 2 people has been digitally altered to blur or grey out the center of the image, covering their faces. In years 7 and 8, I excelled in my studies, receiving the prize for academic excellence across the curriculum in both years. After my diagnosis, I was determined to maintain this high academic standard, and from year 9 onwards, I began working closely with Jackie Donnelly, who's here somewhere. Hello. With Jackie Donnelly, my school's learning enrichment teacher and visual impairment specialist. Every week, we'd sit down and discuss what was working, what wasn't, and how we could make adjustments that would allow me to stay independent in my learning. These meetings were practical, structured, and incredibly important. They helped create a foundation for consistency, not just for me, but for my teachers, who were still learning how to support a student whose learning style didn't fit into a one-size-fits-all model. Together, we developed a system of strategies tailored to how I worked best. That included things like receiving class presentations ahead of time and materials ahead of time so I could enlarge them on my iPad, adjusting classroom seating so I had the best possible line of sight, and using specific color contrast that made information easier to process visually. By the time exams came around, Jackie had helped me advocate for assessment adjustments like extra time, online papers, and modified layouts to make text easier to navigate. What made this process effective wasn't just the accommodations themselves, it was the collaboration behind them. Jackie didn't impose a system on me, she worked with me. That sense of partnership taught me early on that accessibility isn't about lowering expectations or making exceptions for certain students. It's about giving them the tools they need to reach the same standards as everyone else. By the time I began the IB diploma, the groundwork was invaluable. The IB, as many of you may know, is a rigorous and highly standardized alternative to the HSC. It was never designed with vision loss in mind, and Jackie worked tirelessly to liaise with the International Baccalaureate Organisation to ensure my examination requirements met both accessibility and compliance standards. This involved long conversations, trial adjustments, and a great deal of advocacy to make sure that I was being assessed fairly. I completed my exams at the end of last year, receiving a 95.75 ATAR and one of the 10 Academic Excellence Awards given across my cohort. What this experience made unequivocally clear to me was how vital it is for schools to have experienced advocates who understand both the systems and the students they support. Accessibility doesn't happen automatically. It's built through persistence, creativity, and communication. Without that kind of support, students with disabilities can easily fall through the cracks, not because of their capability, but because they grew up in a world that was never designed for them. This is one of the reasons I believe it's so important for schools to have structured, proactive support systems in place. Too often, accessibility is reactive, something that only gets addressed once the student begins to struggle. But in my experience, the best outcomes come when inclusion is built into the systems from the start. When teachers are trained to understand accessibility, when resources are formatted with flexibility in mind, and when students know that support is always there, that's when you create true equity. Even with these systems, there were ongoing challenges. Visual arts, for example, required constant adaptation. Many of the techniques and materials used in class relied heavily on fine visual detail, and I had to find ways to translate those techniques into something that worked for me. That often meant experimenting with different textures, contrasts, and mediums to compensate for what I couldn't see. My visual arts teacher, Sally Marks, who is also the head of design art and technology at MLC, played a huge role in making that possible. From the very beginning, Sally treated my vision impairment not as a limitation, but as a creative parameter, something to explore rather than avoid. She worked with me to adjust materials and techniques, making sure that I could still participate fully in class while maintaining the integrity of my artistic process. Sally's encouragement pushed me to take ownership of my work, and in doing so, I began to see my vision impairment as part of my artistic voice. Art became both a form of adaptation and self-expression, a way to translate the uncertainty of my vision into something tangible. So in my senior years, art really became more than a subject. It became a way for me to document, process, and communicate how my world was changing. Because vision loss, as many of you would imagine, isn't something you can easily put into words. It's abstract, it's inconsistent, it's both visible and invisible at the same time. So for me, my IB exhibition became a kind of visual diary, a space where I could translate what I was seeing, remembering, and feeling into something that could be understood without needing to be explained. One of the first works I created for my exhibition was growing up. The 3-piece charcoal series traced my development through different stages of life, starting with an image of me as a child, then as a preteen with shaded edges, and finally as a young adult, the edges of my face obscured by charcoal shading. But more importantly, it captured how those years of adolescence were marked by gradual change. both in who I was and how I saw the world. For most people, growing up is about expanding independence and clarity, the world slowly coming into focus as you figure out who you are. For me, it was the opposite. As I got older, the world became less defined. Faces, colors, and spaces that once felt certain started to blur, and with them, my sense of stability. That shift from clarity to obscurity became the heart of this piece. The work wasn't about documenting sight loss itself, but about showing how deeply it became intertwined with my identity. As my vision deteriorated, there were times when my complete lack of control and blameless frustration began to fracture my sense of self. This work reflects those times when losing sight of my surroundings felt synonymous to losing sight of myself. Growing up became a reflection of that tension, the feeling of moving forward while something fundamental is slowly slipping away. It represented how vision loss quietly reshaped my understanding of time, that growing older no longer just meant becoming more certain of myself, but learning to exist comfortably with uncertainty. Another of my favorite works from my exhibition is Child, an oil stick portrait of my younger self, a version of me that existed before my diagnosis, when my world was whole and uncomplicated. The work depicts me at around 10 years old, surrounded by a kind of soft, glowing light that makes the image feel almost suspended between memory and imagination. For me, Child represents a period of my life that now feels divided from everything that followed, the before in a life that would soon be defined by an after. It captures a time of innocence where I was unaware of how much my world would eventually change. But rather than mourning that loss, the work allowed me to revisit that period with the bittersweet nostalgia that often comes with grief and change. I wanted Child to preserve the warmth of that time, to acknowledge what existed before without idealizing it. It's not about clinging to the past, but recognizing its place in my story. The glowing quality of the piece mirrors the way I see those memories now, slightly blurred, softened, but full of light. Both Child and the final piece in Growing Up are displayed in the Westmead Children's Hospital Eye Clinic. Having them there feels fitting. They began as reflections of my experience with vision loss, and now they live in a space dedicated to understanding and improving sight. They represent not just the reality of what I see, but the resilience and adaptation that come with learning to see differently. Each of these works allowed me to externalize something that often feels internal and invisible. Instead of explaining to people what my vision looked like, I could show them. Instead of talking about the disconnect I feel with those around me, I can present my experience as an interpretive form of art. That's why art was never just a coping mechanism for me. It was a communication tool. It gave me agency. It let me shape my own narrative rather than having it defined by medical reports or accessibility statements. Throughout the process of creating these works, I began to realize how important it was for me to maintain control over how my story was told. Vision loss can easily be medicalized or pitied, but through art, I was able to reframe it, not as something tragic, but as something complex, intrinsically nuanced, and deeply human. And that, I think, is one of the most powerful things about visual representation. It reminds people that disability isn't one-dimensional. It's not a single story or a fixed identity. It's a constantly evolving relationship between a person and their world. By the time my exhibition came together, I realized it wasn't just about vision loss. It was about perception itself, about how all of us, regardless of how well we see, interpret the world differently. The exhibition became my way of inviting others into that perspective, into my version of reality. In that sense, my art wasn't just for me, it was for others too. It was a bridge between what's seen and what's felt, between my world and theirs. For me, these works were never about perfection or artistic mastery. They were about truth, about finding a visual language for something that doesn't easily fit within the bounds of words. Losing my central vision changed how I interact with the world, but it also changed how I understand it. It taught me that clarity doesn't always come from what we see. Sometimes it comes from how we interpret, communicate, and connect. And that's where the people around me made all the difference. When I think back to my time at MLC, I realize how much of my growth depended not just on systems, but on attitudes. Accessibility wasn't only about receiving digital notes or extra time in exams. It was about being surrounded by educators who genuinely cared, people who listened, who asked questions, who didn't always get it right the first time, but were willing to try again. That's something I can't stress enough. It's not about perfection. It's about unwavering open-mindedness and a willingness to adapt. Teachers, staff, and parents aren't expected to know everything about vision impairment. What matters most is their willingness to learn, to admit when something isn't working, and to work collaboratively with the student to find what does. That mindset made all the difference for me. It turned what could have been isolating challenges into shared problem-solving moments. Because in the end, awareness isn't about having all the answers. It's about recognizing what you don't know and being curious enough to ask. And that awareness is so powerful. It's what turns ordinary classrooms into inclusive spaces. It's what makes a student feel seen, not as a burden or an exception, but as a student just as capable of succeeding as their peers when given the right tools to do so. When inclusion is built into the systems from the start, when teachers are trained to think flexibly, when materials are adaptable, when communication between staff and students is open, accessibility becomes second nature. Students don't have to spend their energy explaining or advocating every day. Instead, they can focus on learning and stress only about the content of their exams rather than their ability to complete them. But I've also learned that accessibility doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes it's about the smallest gestures, like asking before making assumptions, being conscious of visual materials, or describing what's on a board or screen out loud. Those moments of awareness add up. That's what turns a student's daily experience from exhausting to empowering. And beyond the logistics, it's about recognizing the emotional side of adaptation. Vision loss doesn't just change what you can see, it changes how you see yourself. Giving students space to process that, whether through creative outlets, quiet conversations, or simple check-ins, is just as important as any physical adjustment. Confidence grows from that kind of environment, from knowing that you're supported, but still trusted to be capable. For me, that balance between independence and assistance was what built my resilience. My teachers didn't lower their expectations, they helped me to meet them differently. And that's something I think all schools can strive for. Inclusion doesn't have to mean special treatment. It means equal opportunity. It means designing systems that work for everyone, not just for most people. I also want to acknowledge that not every moment will be seamless. There will be times when teachers forget to enlarge something, when technology fails, or when communication slips through the cracks, and that's okay. What matters is what happens next. The willingness to adapt, to take feedback, and to improve. Because every small adjustment, every conversation, every act of listening makes a tangible difference in a young person's experience. When I visit the Westmead Eye Clinic now and see my pieces displayed there, I'm reminded of how these experiences come full circle. Those works began as deeply personal reflections, but now they live in a space where medical practitioners and visually impaired adolescents come together to form a brighter future for everyone. And I think that's what this journey has really been about. My art might focus on vision loss, but at its core, it's about connection, about finding ways to bridge the gap between what's visible and what's felt. That's something we can all do, no matter what role we play, parent, teacher, student, or clinician. So as I conclude for today, I'd encourage you to think about what inclusion looks like in your world. In your classroom, your home, your workspace. Ask yourself, are there ways you can make space for someone else's experience? Can you listen a little longer, question a little deeper, or simply acknowledge when something could be done differently? Because that's where real progress happens, not in perfection, but in participation. In the willingness to keep trying, keep learning, and keep seeing differently. For me, that's what this whole journey has been about. Learning to see differently, yes, but also learning to live fully. Thank you.
Yeah. Interestingly, your act of inclusion, by including your art in Westmead, triggered conversations with my daughter. We've got a photo of Jem
I've
in
seen
front of your art, and it triggered a whole pile of conversations about stuff you can do.
Yeah.
So you can trigger this effect that goes on beyond. Does anyone have any questions? That was a truly exceptional. Thank you very much. Your sharing felt really genuine
Glad.
and is very close to my heart. So thank you very much.
No.
Very appreciate you coming.
Oh, we have question.
On.
How has your art evolved now that you're a young adult?
How has your art evolved now that you're a young adult?
I guess it's been a bit of a process. I think for me, my vision loss meant that I had to work out new techniques, and I used a lot of oil sticks because it was super tactile, so I could use my hands to smudge it and get really up it. I had my own room at school, which became a complete mess, but it was essentially where I did all of my work, and I just got in the zone and was like super, I could go as close as I wanted to the artworks with no one looking at me and being like, why is she nose to nose with her portrait? Like, what's going on? So anyways, I think now that I've got those techniques kind of down pat a little bit more and without the stress of doing art for an examination or to be assessed, I've kind of, I mean, I don't really explore my vision in my art as much anymore because that was the concept for that exhibition. But I think now I've really got those techniques down pat and I have more creative freedom in the sense that I don't get assessed on what I'm making. So yeah, I think it's kind of evolved from a really meticulous process to now a more flowing creative experience. So I think that's probably the main difference in terms of how my art is now.
Yeah. Spoke so beautifully about how educators can be more aware of how to build in accessibility and inclusion in our systems. I'm curious what you think is going to be one of the biggest barriers that you've experienced personally that's kind of built in systemically that we could be addressing better. That's a big question to ask.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think for me, it's difficult because I don't look disabled. And so I think it's very easy without, I mean, you saw the images of what my vision looks like, and I think that's a really good thing. I show people my art sometimes to help them understand, but I think for me, when people hear vision impairment, they don't necessarily understand what that means, especially because I'm not blind and I don't look disabled. And so I think one of the hardest things is really just like the groundwork is that awareness. And so being able to understand what a vision impairment is or what a hearing impairment is or what, you know, what various students need and understanding what that looks like for a student, I think is one of the most, it's a problematic thing, but it can also be really empowering. So to understand, having a relationship, a few of my teachers, as I said, Sally Marks as well, and Jackie Donnelly, we work together, having a really good relationship with people who genuinely understood what it looked like for me and why it was difficult. I mean, there were so many times when Jackie and I were talking and I was like, oh, you know, the teachers didn't send me this, but it's fine. And she's like, no, that's not fine. Like, this is really important. And I think the biggest barrier for me was just teachers and educators not really understanding how difficult it really was for me. So breaking that down was a long process, but I feel like we got there in the end. And I had a really good relationship with all my teachers in year 12 who understood me. So that was a process, but we got there in the end.
How are you going now that you're negotiating at university? You've built that relationship in high school.
Yeah.
What's that transition to university like?
Yeah, I was super nervous because I had all these systems in year 12 and my first day of uni I was freaking out because I didn't know anything. I mean, I hadn't been to uni before, obviously. It was my first day, but I had met with I go to UTS and I have they've got a really good accessibility service there. So I registered with accessibility and was able to have an accessibility manager who's lovely. Michael Tobin is his name. And we worked really closely to make sure that everything was accessible to me. But to be honest, it really is at university. Like, everything is on Canvas, which is a website that has all your class materials, all the presentations, because they've run these subjects so many times and for years and years and years. Everything is very structured and everything is online already, which is the main thing for me. I need access to things and then I can sort of do my own thing. As long as I have access, I can enlarge it and make it accessible for me. So It was easier than I expected. I think school is a lot more difficult because of the rigidity of the exams and the way that that process works, and getting everything approved is really difficult. But for university, it's much more independent in terms of they just want you to be able to learn as best as you can. And I mean, it's the same in high school, but it's just a different thing. I think it's much more inclusive in university. There are spaces that are generally, like, classrooms are easier to access. There's, you know, huge screens like this. Like, this was a lot easier for me than high school. So not a difficult transition for me.
Yeah.
Olivia, do you ever use a cane? And if you do, if you don't use a cane, how would you feel about using a cane?
I don't use a cane. I never have before. And I've thought about it a lot. I mean, as you do, especially crossing roads and things like that. I've thought about guide dogs and various things like that. I think for me, it's really tricky because I kind of have that dichotomy of wanting people to understand my vision impairment or that I'm disabled, but also not wanting that to define me. And I think my only hesitation with using a cane, I mean, if I needed it, I would use it. But I think if it's optional for me, I would probably be tentative to use it just because I don't like the assumptions that come with, I mean, we all know there are many assumptions that come with disability. And I think for me, as I said in my speech, it's easier for me to navigate my own story and be able to tell people on my own terms. And so I think having a cane may minimize my ability to do that, or having a guide dog or anything that's, you can tell that I'm visually impaired. So I think I would be hesitant, yeah, because I think it may take away my agency a little bit to control my story. But of course, if I needed it, I would definitely be okay to use it.
Laura.
How can you like do art? Because I can't see. I can still see a bit. And I can't barely do any art.
Yeah, it's really tricky, especially with some of my works. I'll go back so we can all see them. There's a lot of fine detail. For me, it was just a process of trial and error. And so I tried different techniques, and the thing that worked best for me was charcoal is you may not know, it's a very sort of a tactile process, and it's a lot of smudging. I mean, sometimes I carried some of my works from school to home and they would disappear. Like the charcoal just sort of goes everywhere. But for me, it was kind of about like working on little sections at a time. So I would do the outline, and then I would always start with the eyes, ironically. And so in that charcoal series, it's just an image of my face as like in a similar age that I am now. And I started with the eyes and focused on that shading and took breaks as much as I needed to. As I said, I got really up close and personal with my works, and yeah, and these make me look like an amazing artist, but there were a lot of my works that did not turn out how it planned, and yeah, and definitely looked like they were done by someone with a visual impairment. So yeah, I got there in the end with some of them, but it was a real process of trial and error for sure.
Any other mediums that you've thought about experimenting with, or disciplines of art that aren't necessarily visual for our kids who might not be able to access any type of visual art?
I looked into doing a video series focusing on sound, but I think in the end it didn't fit as well with my exhibition. But I think some forms of digital media can be really useful. I had a slide up, but I ended up removing it. You might have seen it. This is another one of my works, which is just a digitally altered photograph. It's a photo of me when I think I was maybe 5, 4, young, my sister and my mom, and our faces are all blurred out, especially mine. So, and this piece for me, it was easier because I could really, really zoom in. And so for people that are visually impaired, that digital forms of media may be useful. But in terms of people with, blindness and no vision, I think definitely things with sound are really, can be really powerful as well. So I was experimenting a lot with doing videos of, I was imagining having like just a window and drops coming down, and then just like listening to either like voices, like hearing voices speaking or people laughing and just seeing that sort of screen, which again is not the main part of the piece, but yeah, just being able to like use that audible side of art, I think is not really explored very much in the artistic world at the moment, but it's definitely a powerful tool. So yeah, I explored that. Just didn't work in the exhibition in the end, but it was a useful avenue to explore. Yes.
What led you to your choice of degree and what kind of sports?
Yeah, so since I want to say year 10, I was always kind of wanting to do something in uni for something sport-wise. I didn't want to be a practicing physio. It felt a little bit too medical for me. But I wanted to work with people and I wanted to work with sports people. And so I've played soccer my whole life since I was 4 or 5. And that that I guess set the foundation. I played highly representative soccer for 5 years roughly. And yeah, and so that's kind of where my passion began, I guess, like knowing, even for me, I talk about, people say, what job can you do from your degree? And I talk about, if you imagine any sort of sporting match, like any sporting match, there's the teams, but there are so many people around the field. So there are managers of sports teams, and there are the people that organize the events, and there are people that organize sponsorships and, you know, ticketing and all of that sort of thing, which I think is kind of what I'm wanting to do. I just want to be really involved with the sports scene. So that was for me kind of what led me to the degree. And then in terms of the international studies degree, I did Italian in year 11 and 12 and really wanted to continue that. And there's also an opportunity to study abroad, like a 6-month exchange internship scenario. So that was really enticing to me. So I thought I'll do that as well, do the double degree. It's a 5-year course, but it's been really interesting so far. So
Awesome. I think, okay, the last question.
Ever encouraged, or was it ever discussed that you may trial learning Braille, or were you always clearly a large print reader?
for me, the way that my vision is, and because of the clinical trial that I'm on at the moment and will continue to be on, it's just been extended for 3 years, which is very exciting. For me, it was always kind of large print. I think without knowing the progression of my vision impairment and how that would play out, we kind of just had to take it a day at a time. So at the moment, I can read large print as I was on my iPad. I'll show you how big my print is. It's quite ridiculous, but I'm just taking it a day at a time, and at some point in the future, I may need to learn Braille. And I feel like I can kind of cross that bridge when I get to it, because right now it's not a necessity. Yeah, I'll show for those of you who can see. This is sort of what I was reading, so I was scrolling a lot.
About 64 or something.
It's zoomed in a lot on Word. Anyway, yes. So if I was scrolling madly during that, you know why now.
There we go. Okay, Olivia, thank you very much. Fantastic.